Hey guys, welcome back. So first off, this is going to be part one of a sponsored review. The folks at Black Box My Car were nice enough to send me this dash cam at no charge to me for this review. But I'd also like to say that I'm so pleased with how well this thing is performing. I purchased a second unit with my own cash money, so hopefully that buys me some shred of credibility. I'd also like to say that I'm fairly new to dash cams in general. I got my first one in February of this year, so I only have a few months of experience with these things. And in that time, I've learned quite a bit from these following YouTube channels. So I'd like to give a shout out to these guys, and I'll put the links to their channels down below. So first off is Andrew from CarCam Central, and Ariel from Vortex Radar, and MTZ from Romania, and Paul from the UK. And I can't forget to give a shout out to Joseph from Black Box My Car. He's responsible for sending me this camera in the first place, so thanks a lot, Joseph. So right off the bat, I'd like to make a bold statement about this camera, and it's my prediction that this camera is going to be the best budget 2-channel dash cam of 2021. And in this video, I'm going to give you the most important things that will support that statement. So I got this camera. It was delivered on September 25th, and I tested it for 25 days every single day. And after living with it and testing it, I'm convinced that this camera is the best camera for my application, and that's why I bought a second unit. And I didn't buy it to put in a second vehicle. I'm actually going to put both of these in one vehicle, and I'm going to try to build a 4-channel system. So more on that later. So before I came out here, I got on Amazon and I typed in 2-channel dash cams, and there's currently 349 for sale on Amazon. So where does the Viofo A129 Plus Duo fall in, and what makes this camera a standout winner for 2021? So I'd like to give a oversimplified explanation of dash cams, of the categories there are. So as far as 2-channel dash cams go, I think there's 3 categories, and this is just my opinion. There's the premium top-of-the-line class, and those run about $500. And those are from brands like Blackview, Thinkware, and iRoad, and all of those cameras are made in Korea. Now the second category, which is probably the most popular, is the budget class, and that's where I think this camera fits in. This is around $200, and all of these cameras are made in China. Now there's a third category that I think I'd like to call the gateway or the temporary class, and those are sub $100 cameras, and of course those are made in China as well. And those cameras are good and they'll get you by, but basically after using them for a little bit, you discover their shortcomings, and you learn that you want to step up to something a little bit more quality, and that's where this Viofo brand comes into play. So this particular camera is brand new. It was released in September of 2020. But it's kind of not new at all. It's basically a culmination of the previous 3 cameras that they've had. The A119, the standard A129, and the 129 Pro 4K. It's almost as if they've combined everything good about those cameras and fixed some of the problems that they've had with those cameras, and come out with this model, the A129 Plus. So as far as some key specifications and features, I would say the absolute most important thing that makes this camera a standout is the rear camera has its own chipset processor. And as far as I know, this is the only camera that has that. Previously, all of the processing has been handled by the main camera unit. But what I think they've learned is that it creates too much heat. And so what they've done is they've put a processor in each of the cameras. And what that, I don't have any proof, but what I believe is happening is they're actually sharing the processing load, which is actually sharing the heat production, which brings the heat of this front camera down, and that increases reliability, and it increases the reliability of this front camera. And what I mean by that is it prevents it from shutting off prematurely by getting too hot, and it also prevents it from not recording clips to the SD card. If I had to say what the #1 enemy of dash cams is, it's going to be heat, and that's the heat generated by the processor, and that's also going to affect the SD card reliability. So the second thing I want to say about these things is they both have Sony Starvis sensors, and those are pretty much the best top of the line sensors. And the front camera has 2K at 60 frames per second recording, and the field of view is 140 degrees. And some people would say that's a little bit too narrow, but I actually prefer that 140 degree field of view because it makes objects in the center appear larger, and you get less of that fisheye distortion around the edges. And the rear camera records at 1080p at 30 frames per second, and it has a 160 degree field of view, so a little bit wider field of view. And the main camera has a 2-inch LCD screen, and that's really nice for changing settings and reviewing footage. And it also has an external GPS module for coordinates and speed, and that will be shown on a text overlay on the bottom of the screen. And the nice thing about that, you can turn those on and off. This camera also does have dual band Wi-Fi, and what I found, what is the most useful setting for that is when you're doing your initial settings, you can do a time sync. And for my applications, since I'm running 2 cameras, it's really convenient because I can set the time, both of them synchronized, so they're both, the time is set to the second and they both match, and that's really nice. And also with the Wi-Fi, you can download footage to your cell phone, and you can actually view, live view whatever the camera is seeing on your cell phone as long as you're within Wi-Fi range. Also, these cameras use capacitors and not lithium-ion batteries. And just a quick word on that, when it comes to dash cams, you kind of want to avoid something with a lithium-ion battery if you plan on using your camera in a hot environment or in a parked car. Because when it comes to heat, those lithium-ion batteries are not very reliable, and they can swell or even explode when they get too hot. Another key feature of this, it can use a 256 gigabyte SD card, which is really big compared to some other dash cams. This dash cam also does have parking mode, but in order to access that, you have to get a $15 optional Hardwire Kit, and I'm going to say it does require semi-professional installation. If you're comfortable with installing a custom stereo, you should have no problem with it, but if you're not familiar with wiring, you may want to hire a professional to get that installed. And this camera also does have good audio alerts for recording problems, whether it be a malfunction with your SD card or some other type of malfunction. So I've got a list I've built a library of sample clips, and I'll put a link to those sample footage clips down below. And the reason why I upload those separately is because the front camera has that 2K at 60 frames per second resolution, and the rear camera has a 1080p at 30 frames per second resolution. And I like to upload those separately because it maintains that resolution and frame rate. So if you buy one of these cameras and upload your footage should look identical to what I'm getting on my cameras. So during my testing, I've got my settings at, of course, the 2K at 60 frames per second on the front camera and 1080p at 30 frames per second on the rear camera. And I'm using the low bit rate, which is 19 megabits per second. And my wide dynamic range is set to off, and I do not have a CPL filter on these things. And I've been using this SD card. This is the Samsung Pro High Endurance, and I'm using a 64 gig. And just a quick word on SD cards. The first SD card I used with this camera was a very cheap Walmart brand SD card. And the camera kept shutting off after about 40 minutes of recording time. And when I couldn't figure out what the problem was, and when I got a hold of this high endurance SD card, that problem went away. I used this camera and I recorded continuous use for 4 or 5 hours, no problem. So my recommendation would be to use a high endurance SD card with this camera. I don't think it likes the cheap non-high endurance SD cards. And with those settings and with this card, I'm getting 7 hours of record time. So if you got a 256 gigabyte card, you could have 28 hours of continuous record time before it starts looping and recording over itself. And I'm also using my cell phone is an iPhone SE, not the new one, it's the old one, the original from 2016, to use the app and change settings and whatnot. Okay, so I want to get to the pros and cons of this camera. And so far, the pros are excellent front camera picture quality, and that's that 2K at 60 frames per second. And it also has good nighttime and low light picture quality. And I'm going to say this camera has excellent reliability. This thing has been running pretty, I want to say 100% reliable. And I really think that's due to the rear camera by having its own processor, and that is keeping the heat down out of the main camera unit that is responsible writing all of the video files to the SD card. And another pro is it has a good microphone and sound quality. And I don't know if it's because I have this thing mounted in my car or its particular location, but the audio quality is really good. And one thing to note is I drive with all 4 windows down, and I have not noticed wind noise at all. And that's really strange, because I've been using other dash cameras, and when I drive around with my windows down, I would get wind noise. And with this camera, I have not noticed any wind noise whatsoever. And the next pro is I'm going to say this camera has excellent tech support and firmware updates from the manufacturer, Viofo. Since this camera has come out, to my knowledge, there's been 2 firmware updates for the front camera and 1 firmware update for the rear camera. So it seems like this company is really proactive in fixing bugs or software issues with their firmware updates. So I really like that. Okay, let's get to the cons. I don't think this would be a good review if I didn't have some good cons. And so my first con is the parking mode. It requires this Hardwire Kit, and you gotta buy that optional. It's a $15 extra charge, and of course it's going to be a little bit daunting to install if you're not used to dealing with electrical. My second con for this would be the lens, the camera lens adjustment. So when you get this stuck to your windshield, you can adjust the camera. You can see how I'm adjusting it, and in its upright position, you can see it's at about that angle, and in the fully down position, it's about that angle. And I'm going to call this a con because it would be really useful if this camera could adjust all the way back into the passenger compartment. So maybe you could record a police encounter or something like that, or even some carpool karaoke. So that may be something they could improve for the future. Okay, so my next con would be the Viofo app for the smartphone. It's not exactly the greatest. It can be a little bit clunky at some times, but you really don't need to get into that. Again, because it has the 2-inch LCD, you can do all of your settings manually right here on the camera, and with these buttons it really is easy to use. So it's not a real big issue. And for my last con, I discovered this. They do sell this camera in a front only. So if you want to just buy the front channel, you can do that. And what I noticed is that when you're using the front channel only, the recording time on the SD card does not increase. So obviously they've got the SD card partitioned permanently so that when you're using the front camera, you don't get the full capacity of the SD card. It does not increase when you use the front unit only. Okay, so for my final verdict, again, I'm going to call this the best budget 2-channel dash cam of 2021. And I really think that's going to be the consensus of all the professional dash cam reviewers. And this might be fun. If you go to all of those channels that I put down in the links down below, those professional guys, go to those channels and ask them what is the best budget 2-channel dash cam of 2021, and I think it would be pretty fun to get their response. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Hopefully you'll join me for part 2 when I'll go a little bit more in depth with some of the heat testing and power consumption testing that I did with this camera. Okay, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.